In this video you will learn how to create a custom table inside React with filtering and sorting. And actually the first thought that you for sure have, okay, I must use some library, for example React table, if I want to implement tables inside React. And actually maybe you need a library if you have lots of different tables and you don't want to write anything. But actually it is not that difficult to create a table on your own, and if you just need one table, it doesn't make a lot of sense to use a library. This is why here we will implement our users table, which will render our users not only just like plain data, but also by fetching from the API, plus we will additionally implement the filtering and sorting. So as you can see here, I have an empty React project, and inside source I just have main TS6 and app.js6. And if you are wondering why I have here not just JS but JS6, this is because I am using Vite as a build tool. It doesn't really matter, you can use create React app, this is totally fine. So here we have our main component, and let's say that we are implementing our feature to render a table of users. This is why here I would create a new folder which is called users table, and inside it we must create a new component users table.js6. So let's create here our component which will be users table, and this is just component without any props, because typically it will be just a component for a single specific page. And here we want to export this component as a default. And the first thing that I want to do here is fetch our data from the backend. And actually here I already used JSON server to create a fake API. As you can see here, this is our API localhost 3004/users, and this is just an array of users with data that we want to render. It is ID, name and age. And if you don't know what is a JSON server, this is just a node package where we can create this db.json file which looks like this, and then we simply start it inside our console. So here I wrote JSON server watch db.json, and here is a port, and now we are getting fully functional API that we can use inside our application. With that being said, let's jump back inside our source users table component, and here we want to fetch our data and store them inside some property. This is why first of all here I want to create this property, and it will be users. So here we will use a useState hook. This is why we have our users and set users, and we're importing here useState from React. And on initialize we're setting our users to an empty array. Now we also need useEffect, because on our initialize of this component we want to fetch our users. This is why here we have a useEffect with round brackets, so we don't have any dependencies, and inside we want to fetch our data. So here I want to create a URL that we will fetch, and it will be http localhost 3004/users. So here inside fetch we are providing our URL, and we can write then to get our response, but we want to get it in a JSON format. This is why here we're calling rest.json, and then we do then again where we're getting our array of users. And now here we can set our users inside our state. For this we're calling set users with our users array. Let's check if it's working. I will simply write here console for our users, and now we must bind this users table inside our app component. So let's jump inside app component, and inside our app we want to add our users table component. And as you can see, it was auto imported from users table/users table. Now let's jump inside browser and here reload the page. And as you can see, here is our fetched array of users, and inside network, if we will filter it by fetch requests, we can see here our request, this is get, to get our users from the backend. So our data is there, now we must render our table. This is why here after useEffect I want simply to return some markup. But the main idea is that we need to split it to several components so we can support it better. This is why here I will just create a div, and after this I will just write a placeholder for search bar. This is something that we will implement later. After this we have our table, and this is just a normal HTML table. And inside this table I want to have first of all header and secondly columns. So let's create our header first. This is why here let's add a new component which is called header, and I won't provide anything here for now. Now here on the top, I want to create our header component, and we could actually create an additional file for just this header, but we don't have such a huge component. This is why I will write all these components inside a single file. So what do we render inside header? For sure we're rendering the head. This is why here let's return this markup, and here we will have the head. Let's close it, and inside we have our row. And inside our row we want to render every single cell. But for this we must define what columns we have at all. We didn't define it yet. This is why here inside our users table I want to create something like columns. And actually this is an array just with strings where we're defining our columns. If we're talking about users data, we have ID, then name, and then age. And we can provide these columns inside our header component. This is why here let's add these columns as a props, and now we can destructure them here on the top inside our header. So our columns are there. Now inside our tr we can simply map through our columns and render every single header cell. This is why here let's write columns, and we're mapping through them, and we get access to every single column, and now we can simply render here th with our column. And we also should not forget to write here a key, which will be just our column because it is unique. As you can see in browser, our headline is there, but actually we can style it a little bit better. This is why here I want to create users table.css and provide some styles for our users table. First of all, here let's create a users table class, and here we can simply set first of all table layout fixed and also width 100%. And the last one will be here border collapse. Now let's apply these styles. I want to jump back inside our file, and here we can import the CSS from our file users table CSS. Now here on our table we can apply our class name that we just created, and it was users table. As you can see in browser, our table has full width, but actually our header is not styled at all, and we can't see our table. This is why here for our th I want also to create a class name, and let's name it users table cell. Let's jump back to our CSS file and create here this users table cell. So first of all here I want to have a border. This is 1 pixel solid with this color. Also we want to use text align and put it to the left, and also a small padding, for example 8 pixels. As you can see in browser, now every single cell is correctly styled and we're good to go. Now let's render our body. This is why here after our header we can create a new component, and for example we can name it content. And actually here we must provide both our columns and our data. So we have our data inside users, but here I want to name it entries so we understand better what we're talking about inside the component. In our case it will be users, and now we will also provide here our columns that we just created. Now let's create this content component also in this file. So this is our new component, which is called content, and we're getting here 2 parameters. First of all it is entries, and secondly columns. Now here let's return our markup. So what we have here is our t-body, and inside we want to generate a row for every single entry. This is why here we're mapping through our entries, and this is an array, and we're getting access to every single entry. Now here we want to return a row. This is why here we have tr, and we also must provide here a unique key because we are inside map, and actually our entry.id is completely unique. Now inside our tr we want to create cells for this row, and actually for this we can use our columns because for every single column we want to render a cell. This is why here we can map through our columns, and we're getting access to every single column, and here we want to return our cell. So this is why here we're using td, and here we must also provide a key, and it must be unique. So here we have our column, and inside this td we can render the name of our entry. This is why here we simply write entry column. And in this case here we're rendering the information from our object. So here we have some user, this is an entry, and here we're reading a property from this user. In this case here we're mapping through our columns, and we should not create a lot of TDs just to fill our row. But also additionally we want to use the same class name like on the top. This is why here we're creating here users table cell. Let's check if it's working. I will reload the page and voila, we have a really nice table. So we have here our headline and all our rows. And additionally, our component is fully asynchronous and it is getting this data from the backend. But actually we can do it even better. We can implement, for example, sorting. It is not that difficult. Here we must talk about our header, because we must implement quite a lot of logic regarding sorting. But the first step to start here is to create a new state. For now we just talk about data, but it is not enough. We also need to store sorting inside our users table. This is why here let's create a new property and let's name it sorting and set sorting. And here let's use useStateHook, and inside we must provide some default sorting. And inside sorting we will store two properties. First of all, the column. This is what we are sorting. For example, by default it will be ID, and here is an order, and by default we will have ascending, which actually means we have sorting always, we never have unsorted table, and this is much easier to do. Now that we have our sorting, we can render arrows inside our table, inside header cells, and highlight them properly. But for this, inside our header, we must provide sorting property, which is our state. Now here inside our header, we're getting our sorting property and we can use it. But actually I would say that we will write quite a lot of logic for every single cell. This is why here I want to create an additional component. And we can name it header cell. And what we're getting here first of all is a column, because we must know what to render, and secondly our sorting. Now here let's write return, and I want to move the whole th inside our header cell, and instead here I want to render our new component header cell, where we're providing first of all our column. This is just our column, then sorting. We'll also have it here, and the last one is of course key. Our key will be a column. So as you can see in browser, nothing really changed, but we created a sorting and we moved the logic of every single cell inside header in additional component. What we want to do now, we want to highlight sorting. This is why here after our column I want to render a span, and actually we will have two of them. First of all we will write here an arrow down, and secondly we will write here an arrow up. But we also need additional logic, because we only need to render this arrow down when this current column is sorting and it is descending, and we have an arrow up when this current column is sorted and it is ascending. This is why here we must implement this logic. It will be, for example, is descending sorting, and we're rendering this span, and we also have here is ascending sorting, and we have another span. Now here on the top we must write this logic. So what is descending sorting? First of all we're checking our sorting column. So the column inside sorting must equal the column that we're rendering. And the order also must be correct. Here sorting.order must equal descending. Now we must do exactly the same but for ascending. So here is ascending sorting. We're checking our sorting column. This is exactly the same, but order is ascending. Let's check if it's working. I will reload the page, and now here we're getting our symbol of sorting, because by default we're getting the sorted ID, which is ascending. But here we can't really change our sorting, and this is the problem. This is why here inside our users table I want to create a new function, and we can name it sort table. What this function is doing, it essentially simply sets a sorting. So here inside we can simply call set sorting, and we must provide new sorting here. This is why here I would say that we're getting new sorting and we're providing it inside. Most importantly is we must use this function and provide it inside our header. This is essentially our callback. So here we have sort table, and we know that our header is getting now a new callback sort table that we can use. But the point is that we will have our click inside header cell. This is why we must provide sort table inside our header cell component. Now here we can apply onClick event. And inside onClick, we want to simply call our sorting of the table. This is why here, first of all, we are getting sort table inside props, and here we need to call it. So we're calling sort table, and we must provide here a correct sorting. So what we're sorting here, first of all, we're getting our column, and secondly, we must provide a correct order. But the problem is we don't have this property, we must calculate it. This is why here, let's create it like future sorting order, because it is the order which will be next. This is not our current order. And here, let's create this property, and we simply are checking, okay, do we have descending sorting now? If yes, then we want to set a future order to ascending. In other case, we are setting it to descending. Let's check if it's working. I will reload the page. By default, it is sorted ascending. Now I am clicking here, and it is directly sorted descending. And yes, sure, we didn't refetch our data, but actually it is working correctly, because here we can set our order. And actually I can even click name, and then we're setting order here. Now the main problem that we have, we must also adjust our API, because here we simply fetch just a single URL and it doesn't have any parameters. So here I want to provide a sorting, and this is totally fine to provide it even on initialize. This is why here _sort, and we are providing here our sorting column. This is why here sorting.column. And we must also provide here our order. This is why here we have _order, and this is the variable sorting.order. And as I have here escaped properties, I must also use another string from ECMAScript 6. This is totally fine, but the problem is we don't refetch our API every single time when we change our order. And we can easily apply this logic just simply by updating this dependency array. We can provide here our sorting. This is why every single time when we are changing this property, this sorting, our use effect will be triggered again with the new sorting, and we will refetch our data. Let's check if it's working. I'm reloading the page, and here by default we have 1 to 3. Now I'm resorting it by ID, and we're getting 3 to 1. And actually this is updated information from the backend. This is nothing that we're storing on the client or sorting on the client. And this is extremely important, because if you have 10,000 elements inside your API, it doesn't make a lot of sense to sort them on the client. It is simply not fast enough. As you can see, our sorting is functioning correctly, and now we're simply missing a filter functionality. This is why here on the top we have our search bar, and the idea is that we will type something there, then hit enter, and our table will be filtered. For this we must create a new component here, and we can name it, for example, search bar, and here we must provide a callback, so search table. And actually this will be a function which will trigger our API call again. And here we can provide a function search table. So let's create this function now. Here we have search table, and we know that we're getting a search string from our input. This is why here let's just write search value. And actually the question is what we will update, and we want to store this search value also inside our state. This is why here let's create search value and set search value. And here we have our use state, and by default it is just an empty string. Now what we are doing inside this function is just setting this search value. This is why here set search value, and we are providing inside our new search value. This is why it is better to write here word new, so we don't have name collision. As you can see, we are setting search value, but we don't use it. The main idea is that we can provide search value now here together with our sorting, and our use effect will be triggered. This is why here let's write search value, and now we can also use it inside our API. This is why here I can simply write and we have name like, which actually means we want to filter by name field. And here we're searching by search name. The main idea is that by default it is an empty string. This is why it is totally fine to search like this. It won't filter anything by default. So we're fully ready from the outside. Now we must create this search bar component. And inside this file I want to simply create this search bar, and this is just a form with a single input. So here inside we can destructure our callback search table, and let's return some markup. So here I want to write a div with class name, so we have at least some margin, and let's name it, for example, search bar. and I want inside our CSS to just create a class search bar with margin bottom, let's say 20 pixels. Now inside this div I want to write a form. And actually we need a form because we want to call our callback only after submitting it, not just after changing an input. This is why here we have onSubmit, and here we will simply call our search table. And here we can create a function submit form. Now let's create this function here. It is just getting an event, and inside we first of all are doing event prevent default. And after this we want to call our callback, and this is search table. And we must provide inside a value from our input. We don't have this yet. So here let's create an input with type text, placeholder search, and the value. And we don't have a value, which actually means here inside our component search bar we must create a search value, and it is not the same value as outside. This is just for this specific input. This is why here let's create our search value and set search value, and this is just a use state with an empty string. Now here inside our input we can provide a value, and it will be our search value, and onChange function. And inside onChange function we are getting our event, and we can call here setSearchValue, where we are providing event.target.value. So actually our search bar is just a simple form with a single input like we typically write inside React. The most important point that this is an internal state, and only when we are submitting a form we are calling this callback search table, and we are providing inside this search value from this component. And then inside our users table, the search table is being called, this is this function, and here we simply update our state outside. And we have this state just so our use effect is triggered again. Let's check if it's working. We don't have any errors. Here is our search. I can just type, for example, Jack, and I'm hitting enter. And as you can see, we just have a Jack. The main point is we submitted our form and our use effect was triggered again. What is nice, we can write here, for example, my, and we're getting Mike, which actually means it is working like include and not like equals. As you can see, in 100 lines we implemented our own table, and you don't need a library for every single feature that you need to implement. And actually, if you're interested what is the easiest approach to implement forms inside React, make sure to check this video also.